Welcome, welcome, everyone. John Beaudin, Shannon Edwards, and our special guest today, well known to Elton John fans. He was with Elton John for quite a while. Kate Bush and Wham and Nik Kershaw. And we're going to get to a whole bunch of other people that he's worked with. Charlie Morgan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the obvious as far as a musician stuck in the house. I mean, you've got an impressive resume. I mean, I've been a fan for a long time. I'm a drummer. My son's Pearl Kit's back there. He's been. It's a.
I'm trying to look around you.
It's birch. It's a birch kit. He loves it.
Oh, nice.
But he's been a fan forever, and he's might come down and say hi to you after a little while. But how has all this affected you? I mean, how is?
Well, I had a bunch of gigs lined up over the year. Quite a lot of corporate gigs, as I do a lot of these multi-artist shows, and I had a number of them for a couple of different companies, and they just emailed me the first week of lockdown and said, "That's it, we're not doing anything this year at all." So every single gig I had disappeared for the year. I did do one gig last weekend. I played at Arrington Vineyard with a trio, instrumental trio, last weekend. We were up on the porch, and everyone was drinking wine on the hillside.
Wow.
So there's hope. But I've been doing a fair bit of studio work, which has been great.
Well, how did it start? How did it start for you? I mean, what was it a particular drummer, a particular, like so many people talk about seeing the Beatles of my ilk when I interviewed people that I grew up with. But what was it? What was the trigger for you?
Well, I think the Beatles were definitely part of it because my parents were very hip. I was very lucky. My parents introduced me to the Beatles. They also introduced me to Frank Sinatra, Mozart, the Rolling Stones. I mean, my dad was an advertising executive and my mother was a graphic artist. So, my dad had the first Mini in the square, and my mother wore the first Mini in the square.
That's really hip. But was there defining moments? For instance, I know as a drummer there was a point, and as a hockey player, there was a point where I said, "This dog won't hunt. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm not going to get to that level, and I've got too many other things going on." But was there a point, Charlie, that you thought, "Yeah, I'm going to be able to do this for a living"?
Well, yeah, it's funny because I had a friend at school whose dad actually played cello and his uncle played viola on all the Beatles stuff. They were part of that ensemble. And he was a friend of mine. He'd learned cello. His dad had taught him cello. This is the same guy, by the way, that taught Paul Buckmaster, Elton's arranger, cello. Because Paul Buckmaster was a cellist. So here's a guy called Peter Halling. And my friend was Rod Halling, and we were at school together. And I think when I was about 13 or 14, he'd been playing guitar for a while, and he phoned me up one day and said, "Did I know anyone at school that played drums?" And I said, "I'll do it." And I had played a drum kit when I lived in Switzerland in the late 60s. I had a friend of mine who had a whole band set up in his basement, and I literally just got down and sat on the kit and started playing a 4/4 beat, and the guy said, "Wow, that took me 6 months to master."
Well, wait a minute. You must have been tapping before that. Weren't you tapping at all off drums before that or not?
Not really, not until I was 14 or 15, or 69, 1970, I suppose.
Wow.
Not at all. I mean, my friend in Switzerland said, "How on earth did you get the independence for that?" I said, "I don't know. I just did what I saw Ringo doing, on the Beatles videos." And so he said, "Well, you've got a natural ability," and I didn't think any more of it. And then my friend Rod phoned me and said, "Did I know a drummer?" And I said, "I'll do it." And we formed a garage band, and we played a number of charity concerts at my school. School was very artistically minded. Again, I was very lucky in that respect. It's the same school that all kinds of actors and musicians came out of. It's it was a very artistically minded school, and So we were encouraged. We did these charity concerts at the school. But Hugh Grant was 5 years below me at school.
Wow.
And Alan Rickman was 10 years ahead of me at the same school. And there are a number of people, personalities that came out of my school.
So indirectly, you were in Love Actually. I can see that right now. Indirectly. So
yeah, actually, Hugh Grant was a very naughty boy. He was 5 years younger than me, and I gave him detention one time.
Is that right? But
yeah.
You know what? And normally that would be a claim
prefect.
to fame for one person. Sorry to interrupt you. No.
Yeah, I was a prefect at the school, and he was a little scruffy teenager, and he was running in the corridor, and I said, "Grant, come here." Detention. He went, "Oh, Morgan."
Wow. So how do you jump from that? Like, when was the first big gig that you had?
Well,
the bragging gig.
Okay, all the way through my school years, I had no concept of becoming a professional. But by the time I turned 17, I was playing in a bunch of bands in pubs throughout London.
Yeah.
Summer of '73, I was playing. I was in quite demand. I was playing in various different bands on the pub circuit. And I went back to school in the autumn of '73, and I was still trying to play 4 or 5 gigs a week and do my last year of school. And the headmaster called me in and said, "Look, I think we've got a conflict of interests here." He said that my extracurricular activities were getting in the way of my schoolwork. And I said, "Well, I think my schoolwork's getting in the way of what I'm doing." And so we agreed to go our separate ways, and I left school. So I left school at the age of 18 and hit the road with a rock band. I was 18. They were all 24, 25 years old. And the first major gig we played the US Air Force bases in Germany. We played right away through Christmas into New Year and beyond.
Did you? Where?
6 nights a week, 5 hours a night, trekking around different NCO clubs. So I was playing a kind of little
Did you
America.
like it? Were you enjoying at that spot in your career? Were you enjoying it? Was it arduous? What was it like?
It was tough. I mean, I went to Germany a child, and I probably came back almost a man, should we say? It was a learning process. It was a huge learning process, but I had a ball. I loved it, and the GIs were absolutely wonderful to us. I mean, they just took us under their wing, and they were, we weren't being very well paid, so we were barely making our money work in Deutschmarks. But these GIs were actually taking us into the PX stores, changing our money into dollars, and then we were buying stuff that was all subsidized, US government subsidized, in the PX stores, because they were GIs. They were going, "Oh, he's with us. Don't worry, he's with us."
Yeah.
So they looked after us for about 4 months over Christmas and New Year of '73 into '74.
And that's an interesting mindset too. Sorry to interrupt you. That's an interesting mindset too. That's I mean, that's brother to brother. They got your back, and if they like you, they got your back as well. I mean,
yeah,
that's a nice thing. That can be a very nice thing.
It was great. I mean, that was my first experience of America, if you like, albeit in Germany. But they were so great to us. I mean, they just treated us so well.
Sorry, someone just said I was there 69, 72. I don't know if that means anything to you.
No, I was 73, 74. So that was just prior to me. Yeah.
Someone's asking how you. Sorry. Someone's asking how did you get the gigs for Elton John and with Orleans? Is it word of mouth with that kind of thing? Is it? I mean, how does Elton hear about you? Did you know him?
Elton John. Well, that was okay. By the early to mid '80s, I was one of the top 5 session players in the UK. And Elton, in early '85, around Easter of '85, he was tracking a new album, and Nigel was no longer in the band, so he was using different rhythm sections. And he'd heard the Nik Kershaw album, and Nick and George Michael were doing backup vocals, and I think Nik was playing guitar on Nikita, which was that was Dave Mattox and David Payton on drums and bass. But Elton said to Nik, he said, "I really like the drummer that's on your stuff," and he said, it's a guy called Charlie Morgan. My producer Peter Collins uses him for everything he does, and which is true. And so I got a phone call early in '85, and I was booked on a session the day after Easter in '85, and I didn't even know until about 2 or 3 days beforehand who it was for. I was just used to my diary service. In those days we all had a diary service, and we'd call in to our diary service and say, "What have you got?" And they'd say, "Well, I've got this and that." That was the only way that you could book gigs without having a conflict. And I only found out about 3 days before, that literally the Friday before I went to do the first sessions, that it was Elton.
And what was your reaction when you found out it was Elton?
Well, I don't know. It was great. I mean, I thought, fine, lovely. I loved Elton's music.
And you were already seasoned by then anyway. It's not like you were a young kid, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd started doing sessions in about 78, 79. And by the mid-'80s, as I said, I was one of the top call session players. I was doing BBC sessions, I was doing TV sessions, and I was doing a lot of recording sessions. I mean, the previous year, I'd recorded with Roger Daltrey, with Gary Moore, Phil Lynott. I did Out in the Fields, and then I'd done the Nik Kershaw album, Human Racing, the first album. Yeah. So, at the time, I was maybe working 70 or 80 hours a week. And it's funny because Dave Mattox said that there are a number of stages to a session musician. There's who is Charlie Morgan, then there's get me Charlie Morgan, then there's get me somebody who plays like Charlie Morgan, and then finally there's who is Charlie Morgan. The 4 ages of the session musician.
Everything's cyclical. There you go.
And at the time, Dave Mattox and I were probably the 2 of the top session players in England, and we were giving each other gigs. If we had a clash, we were swapping gigs, and it just happened that we ended up, both of us, on the Ice on Fire album in 1985.
What about Orleans?
Orleans, well, that was after I'd moved to the USA. In the late 90s, in 98, 99, I bought a house in Florida, in Orlando. And I think I went down with a friend to Universal City Walk. There was a theater in Universal City Walk, and every Monday night there was a band there, and I went in and I saw the band, and I realized that this was Larry Hoppen. It was the Larry Hoppen All-Stars. And I went in one of the breaks, I went and introduced myself, and Larry said, "Hey, do you know Still the One?" And I said, "Yeah, I definitely do." Because I was in a band in the late 70s in England, and we had that Waking and Dreaming album, and we played just about every track on that album. I knew
Jerry Marotta.
Yeah, Jerry Marotta, and Wells Kelly as well. But they had 2 drummers for a while. But so Larry said, "Well, we do that close to the end. Do you want to sit in on that?" And I said, "Sure." So I sat in on it. We became friends, and then Larry started using me on the gigs in 99, 2000. And the next 18 years, I was an official member of the band.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. We've got some questions here.
I've got one here. What music legend calls you Charlie Warley? and what is your favorite story about her?
Kate Bush. Okay. Charlie Warley. But it came from the sound engineer, Hayden Bendel, who worked with Kate a lot. And I would come in and do sessions, and he'd say, "Hello, Charlie Warley." And so Kate got that, and she actually signed the Hounds. She gave me a boxed set LP of the Hounds of Love, which I have back in my storage in the UK. And it actually says on it, "To Charlie Warley, lots of love from Katie Waity."
See, everyone has preconceived ideas about Kate Bush. I mean, I was on to her music right from the beginning, but My biggest thing, and you tell me. I kept going. She's got to be one of the most. She's probably like one of those Joni Mitchell characters where she's eccentric and looks at things differently. But is she like that?
Yeah, but there was a certain amount of suburban normality about her as well. I mean, she came from a suburban family in the southeast of London. And, her dad was a doctor. Her mother was this absolutely wonderful Irish woman, Hannah. She would bring us a cup of tea. Would you like a cup of tea, Charlie? She'd bring this tray of tea with biscuits in the middle of a session, We're trying to work out the drum track on Jig of Life or something, and she'd be walking in. She was an absolute sweetheart, and her dad was just a total. He was a doctor. He was a local doctor, and he was a hippie, complete hippie. And then her brother Paddy was a kind of multi-instrumentalist, and then her older brother Jay was a journalist, and he made friends with Dave Gilmour, which is how Kate got signed up. I mean, I don't know if you know the story, but she was incredibly shy when she was 14 or 15. But Jay heard her playing piano and singing. And anytime anyone went in the living room, she would stop. And so he called up Dave Gilmour and said to Dave, look, you've got to come and hear my sister. But there's the caveat is we can't actually let her know that you're coming to listen to her. So apparently they listened through the living room door to her, and that's what got Dave Gilmour interested. And then he paid for some sessions, and EMI signed her on a development deal. But The Man with the Child in His Eyes is one of the songs that they did live with a full orchestra, with Andrew Powell conducting, and that was one of her first demos that got her the EMI record deal.
So how was it decided whether you were drumming on a song or Stuart Elliott was drumming on a song? How did that work out?
I think Kate decided it. And on a couple of occasions, I think Stuart and I both tried bits of the track. And there are actually a couple of tracks, I think, where we're both playing different things on it. Mm-hmm. But I think really, Stuart was on the first two albums. I ended up on the second album, Lionheart, and then carried on. But I was a member of the band in '78, but in '79 I left the band to join the Tom Robinson band, the melodic punk band, and I toured the whole of North America and Europe with the Tom Robinson band. So it wasn't until a few years later that I came back into the fold. I
should mention that Jerry Murat, I just interviewed him, and he was saying that as far as Wells in Orleans, he says if Wells was still drumming today, he'd be known as one of the great ones, because he says he learned a lot just from him.
Yeah, Wells. Yeah, as a character, Wells was pretty wild.
Yeah.
He died in London, actually, of a drug overdose. He died while he was in London. And it was about a year before I met Elton, and I was a top session player, and he was playing with Meatloaf. And I got the phone call to go and do an audition. And I went down and I got offered the gig. And I asked around, and a friend of mine just said, don't do it. He doesn't pay. His checks bounce. He's completely unreliable. Don't work for Meatloaf. And actually, soon after that, I did the Gary Moore, Phil Lynott thing, and we toured the whole of the summer of '84 then with Gary Moore and Phil Lynott doing TV shows and concerts. And then in '85, I met Elton. So it kind of worked out for the best, really.
Okay.
Wow. So who were some of your biggest musical influences?
This is all coming from the fans.
It's all coming from the fans.
Yeah.
Well, the Beatles, yes, of course. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones. But in the late 60s and early 70s, I heard Led Zeppelin.
Oh, there you go.
And Deep Purple, and I got into Black Sabbath. So I got into the heavier side of music. And it's funny, though, because my dad liked the Led Zeppelin albums. He loved Led Zeppelin's 1, 2, and 3.
Whose dad likes Led Zeppelin back then? That's amazing.
Yeah, my dad loved Led Zeppelin. Here I am. I'm 15 years old, and I'm trying to rebel. Right?
Stick it to the man.
I think I'm playing side 2 of Led Zeppelin 1 flat out in our living room at the back of the house. And my dad comes in from work and he kind of stands there and listens for a while. And it gets to a gap between 2 songs. And he said, yeah, that's great. It's just blues, but louder.
Mm-hmm.
And then he left.
That could have been the review of Led Zeppelin. That album, that's the perfect thing to say about that album, especially that one.
Blues, but louder. Yeah. I mean, really, when you think about it, yes, the roots are right in blues. I mean, that's what Jimmy Page was doing. Jimmy Page was in the Yardbirds. And, I mean, they were going to be called the New Yardbirds when they first formed, weren't they?
Yeah.
But, yeah, so I really got into the heavy rock thing. And then it kind of went from there. Yeah, I'd say Bonzo was a big influence. Ian Pace was a huge influence. And then, later in the 70s and early 80s, I heard a lot of American music, especially after I toured the USA and Canada in 79. I came back. I mean, we were with the Tom Robinson Band, we were in LA for about 3 weeks. And we were staying at the Hyatt House, the Riot House, on the 12th floor, for part of it, along with Bootsy Collins. The guys with their massive froze and platform
big
heels.
glasses. Yeah.
They were the sweetest guys too. We were sharing up the 12th floor with them. There's, a punk rock band on one side and there's Bootsy Collins. And I think later on Parliament Funkadelic turned up. It was these guys, anyway, it was a trip. And, during that time we were there, we went down Sunset and we went into Tower Records and we just started buying albums, and at the time they were LPs. So, but I put all the stuff into our back line, and we kind of smuggled all these records back from America, back into England.
You still have them all? You still have them all?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have them. They're all in storage in the UK. I've got a big kind of rack. It's actually a rack from a store that's up a wall, and it's in my storage unit in the UK. Got to bring it over here sometime.
Yeah, it's expensive to bring. Records is so damn heavy.
Okay, so who's your favorite drummer?
Now, I think all round Steve Gadd. Jeff Porcaro as well. Jeff and I were pretty good friends for a while. He preceded me on a couple of Elton albums. And I met Jeff with Rick Marotta. They came to see us about 3 nights before we flew to Australia to do the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra shows. We were playing the Universal Amphitheatre in LA. We've played, I think, 5 nights in a row at Universal Amphitheatre in October, November of 86. And then I stayed there for about a day or two, and then we flew to Australia to play with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. But one of those nights, I came off stage and Jeff Porcaro and Rick Marotta were there. And Rick drove me back to his house in Woodland Hills in his DeLorean.
What year did you end up going to?
What's that?
What year did you end up going to in his DeLorean in the time machine?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. Well, you've got to get to 80 miles an hour, haven't you? Isn't that 80? Wasn't it 80? I can't remember.
Yeah, something like that.
So I went back to his house in Woodland Hills in his DeLorean, and Jeff turned up, and Jeff had just come off the road. Can't remember who with. I know that Rick had just come back from Australia with Stevie Nicks, and Stevie Nicks had checked herself into the Betty Ford clinic immediately after. So Rick was kind of bemoaning these female artists, and I think I just split up with my girlfriend, and Jeff had just split up with his girlfriend. So we spent the whole night polishing off a couple of bottles of brandy. And then actually I remember I had to get a taxi back to the hotel and then get packed to fly to Australia. So I got on a plane with a massive hangover.
You got know?
Did Charlie get asked to audition or join Status Quo in the early 2000s?
You guys say status, we say status.
Status quo, innit?
Sorry.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Okay.
I knew a couple of the guys in the band, but I didn't. No.
So what was the first experience going into the studio with Elton? What was that like? Did
It
they
was
work differently than anybody else you'd worked with, or was it just...
Well, I mean, when I first went in there, I set up my kit, the bass player arrived, and we got some sounds because we were the new people, because everyone else was there. Davey Johnson was there. I met Davey, and I met Gus Dudgeon, and Stuart Epps, the sound engineer. So we got some sounds, but they wanted us to just play for about 5 minutes as a rhythm section. So we were playing some kind of funky feel, up-tempo funky feel that would give them enough to go on. And I remember I was in the booth and I was looking into the control room, and this little figure ran across the window in the control room, pointing his finger at the assistant engineer. Apparently Elton had heard what we were playing and he had an idea for it, and he was kind of trying to get some of it down on cassette at the time. So he was trying to get the assistant engineer to hit the record button and make sure that he captured some of what we were playing. And that actually became the song Wrap Her Up. And we, the bass player and I, Paul Westwood, the bass player, and I actually got a songwriting credit for that.
I look at sometimes with Elton John the different stages of drummers. Being a drummer, I play close attention to it. I look back at Roger Pope, and Roger filled a lot. Roger was a busy drummer, very, very busy, especially on Blue Moves and Rock of the Westies.
Yeah, but he never played anything superfluous. Roger Pope was an incredible technician. He's probably technically the best drummer Elton ever had. I've never pretended to be a technician. Roger Pope was, he was an amazing drummer. I mean, Rock of the Westies is Blue Moves. I mean, we opened the '86 tour with One Horse Town, and that's a Roger Pope track, and I had some big shoes to fill right there. But he was. I think technically he was the best player Elton had. He was, he was completely jazz trained, and I loved what he did on those albums, and the stuff on the Kiki D albums as well, and also his work with Hall & Oates and Harry Nilsson.
Yeah, and Hookfoot, with Caleb.
Hookfoot. Well, yeah, I mean, Hookfoot were the basis for part of the band that Elton used during the early albums. Do you know where the name comes from? Well, Roger had a Ludwig kit. And in the early 70s, the Ludwig hardware wasn't that great. I don't know if you remember those late 60s, early 70s hi-hats. But they had one little spur, and it never really did a great job of actually gripping the carpet or anything. So what would happen is he'd be playing and he'd be pushing with his foot, and the hi-hat would start moving away from him. So he developed a technique where he would actually, and I think Caleb Quay came up with the name, but he would get his foot round the hi-hat while he's playing the ride cymbal on the other side and hook it back into place. So bring it back so he could play it again, because it was getting to the point where and the band was called Hookfoot because Roger used his foot to hook the hi-hat back into place. I think Caleb came up with the name.
I should ask him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Your first gig with Elton was a little thing called Live Aid. Can you talk about the monitor situation at that show?
By the way, did anybody show up on that show? I'm just curious.
But it was funny enough, when we were doing the sessions, Elton actually, this is how he put it to me. He came to me during, actually it was the second lot of sessions that I got booked for. I got booked for 3 days. I was at the mill for 3 days, and then I got another phone call saying Elton wants to do a duet with Cliff Richard, and that was Slow Rivers. And I went back to do Slow Rivers, and Elton came up to me at one point and he said, "Hey, I'm doing this little charity show for Bob Geldof and Midge Ure, at Wembley Stadium in July. I wonder if you consider being the drummer for it. And I said, sure. So he said, this little charity show. Then my first live gig with Elton was Live Aid. Yeah, it was no monitors. Yeah.
What was that like?
No monitors for the first 2 songs for me. And I know that all I could do was basically, luckily for me, I could see Elton, and Elton has a very heavy foot.
Yeah.
His left foot was thumping away, and I could see him thumping his foot in time, and I was just playing to his foot, like on Benny and the Jets, for instance. But I know that Kiki D had no monitors out front as well during the whole of Don't Go Breaking My Heart. She didn't have any monitors, and it's amazing if you listen to her performance, because she has the most amazing intonation. And
Kiki D is one of the most underrated singers that I love Kiki D. Yeah,
without a doubt. I actually got I got to do an album that she was involved in a few years back, in 2012, actually, about 8 years ago. It was a charity album that, and she was just amazing. I mean, even now, her voice is as good as it ever was. And I think you're right. She's incredibly underrated as a singer. Yeah. She had the most amazing intonation, always has.
Shannon, you got some questions?
Any musicians from the 70s, 80s that, looking back, you remember with particular fondness?
Phil Lynott.
Oh, yeah.
Sweetest
man.
Man.
Way too young. Yeah.
Sweetest man. He died a year after I was working with him, and we toured the whole of that summer of '84, doing TV shows and promos and concerts. And we played a gig in Cologne in Germany, where we were supposed to be on at about 10 o'clock at night. It was a multi-artist lineup. We were doing like a 45-minute set, I think. We were supposed to be on about 10 o'clock at night. We ended up going on at 2 or 3 in the morning, just because they had technical problems. And they were televising us, But I had to fly out of Cologne back to London because I had a session in the morning at Abbey Road, I think. And so we got back to the hotel about 3:30, and I had to get up at 6 in the morning. And I just remember Phil was staying at the Canadian Pacific Hotel in Cologne, which is this very tall, modern building. And we're way up, like 25th or 30th floor or something. And we're in reception getting our keys, and Phil looked at me and said, "You're not going to bed, are you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, come on. So I went to his room, and we polished off the minibar. And I didn't sleep a wink, and I got on the plane, and I think I snoozed for about an hour on the plane. And I must have been exuding alcohol from every pore in my body when I walked into the studio. And I was drinking coffee as much as I could, wherever I could. But I did get through the session. I think it was a BBC session. But yeah, Phil and I finished, we raided his minibar on that particular occasion.
I was talking to Elton John's editor for his website. We had a long private conversation a couple of days ago. And all he told me is, Charlie tells a great story.
That was John, was it?
Yeah. He says you're in for some good stuff. But at Live Aid, didn't you play also with Wham?
I did, but not at Live Aid.
Okay.
But George Michael came and did "Don't Let the Sun Go Down."
Right.
But yeah, I played on the Edge of Heaven EP.
Mm-hmm.
But Elton played piano on that as well.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does a gig with someone like Elton John? I've asked everyone this that's worked with Elton. How does that? Kenny Passarelli told me, he says, Elton bought me a house. He gave me enough money to buy my first house or something when that ended after Blue Moves. But how does that end? You don't get a call. You get a call. How does that work?
Well, I was, first 2 years I was with Elton, I was on a contract, a yearly contract. I was being paid a salary. But that kind of ended around the the rehab days. Well, he came off the road for a while, and that just kind of ended. My contract didn't get renewed, and and I thought, okay, I went back to doing session work. And then in 1990, Elton disappeared off the face of the earth. I mean, I think I played a few gigs with him in 89 and 90. But he disappeared off the face of the earth and went into rehab and came out again. And then late 1991, I got the phone call saying, we're going back on the road. We've done another album. We want to do a world tour in 92. And so, I was back on the road from 92 through to 98 with him, albums and touring. But from 92 onwards, we were being booked and paid on a tour-by-tour basis and an album-by-album basis.
Right.
We were just paid on a weekly basis every time we were working.
See, I think fans
are
really interested in that because they don't know. See, people on the outside never even think of asking themselves, well, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, by then, I think they decided that having a band on a salary was kind of,
Right.
We'd rather do it on a contract on a tour-by-tour basis, which is fine by me at the time because I was still doing lots of session work for other people,
Yeah.
The secret was not telling people I was away. It was accessing my voicemail at the time, pre cell phones, accessing my voicemail and phoning people back and saying, "Oh, I'm awfully sorry, but I've already got a session on. I can't do that session for you next week." Not telling them I was in Germany or Australia or USA, because as soon as they realize you're on the road for 3 months, they stop phoning you.
Oh yeah, of course. Chen?
Okay, so you're on a desert island, and you have
it's a desert island questions.
And you have one person, you got one album and one book. What's it going to be?
So one person as a companion.
One book and one album.
One book and one album.
Yes.
Wow, who asked that?
Boy. Wow.
No pressure. There's no pressure.
No pressure, right?
None.
Right.
It could be how you're feeling for the week.
The person, I don't know. I met so many interesting people. In terms of conversation, I mean, Elton takes a lot of beating. He's a very, very clever man. He's very funny. And he used to have us in stitches. He's hyper intelligent. So let's go for that. I mean, if not talking about a companion for, so it doesn't have to be female. Although Kate Bush should be, that'd be nice. She was always very interesting and very eclectic. One album, boy, one album. I'm a musician.
It wasn't my question.
Wasn't our question.
We
take no responsibility.
None.
Actually, I'm going to choose something classical.
Sure.
Because my aunt and uncle were classical musicians. Again, I was brought up in this. There's one piece of music that really moves me, and it's about 4 hours long, so it's a good album to take to a desert island. It's the St. Matthew Passion by Bach.
I'm going to write that down. Would I know it if I heard it? Is it one? It's not like is it more obscure?
There are a lot of chorales, there are a lot of choruses, a lot of solos, and then it's all joined together by a narrator who sings in that kind of sing-song style. But it's by the time I was 8, I think I'd seen it 3 times at the festival hall because my aunt and uncle were playing violin and cello on it, so I knew it. I mean, and it's a 4-hour experience.
What about the book?
The book, Lord of the Rings.
Oh.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get through those.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took me a long time because you're constantly trying to. For me, the way I'm wired, I kept going. Who's that one? Who's that guy again? I'd write down the characters, and it was.
Yeah, it's all very well with these kids now watching the movies, and they go, "Oh, well, he's Legolas," and he's. Yeah, hang on a second though.
Yeah.
If you're reading the book, you have to imagine it in your own head.
Yeah. Have you ever had to turn down some artists that we may know? Probably.
Yes.
That Charlie Morgan should have been on that album, but he couldn't do it because
Well,
he's too...
not so much an album, but it was a tour, and this is a place where, this is when I was under contract with Elton, and it was 1987, probably 87, 88. I raced cars for many years. I don't know if you know about that.
No.
But 25 years I raced. I started off in production sports cars, or the old MGB, and then I went on to race Golf GTI in the touring cars. And one of the other guys that used to race a BMW, amongst other things, was Nick Mason. So he and I became friends. And I got a phone call in, I think it was 87, from Nick Mason, said, "Hey, look, I need to ask you a question. We're going back on the road, and I haven't played drums in a long time, so I need somebody else to also play drums and a bit of percussion and help me, get back into the swing of things. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah, but I've got another 3 months to run on my contract with Elton, so I've got to phone the office and check." And I phoned the office and said, "Okay, are you going to renew my contract?" And they said, "Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely, yes." So I phoned Nick Mason back and said, "Sorry, but I'm under contract and I won't break a contract. I can't do that." And so he got Gary Wallace. And then, of course, needless to say, I told you that Elton didn't renew the contract, or the management didn't renew the contract 3 months later. So it was like, WTF.
Pink Floyd. Oh, man. Yeah.
But yeah, Pink Floyd. I could have been a member of Pink Floyd. And but the good news is that, later on, obviously Elton went back on the road, and I started recording again, and I was back in Elton's band. So, it kind of worked out the way it should have done.
We're getting a lot of questions here.
Do you prefer doing studio session work or performing live at a concert?
Is it apple oranges in that case?
Yeah, it's definitely apples and oranges. I like both. I do like both. It's probably important to note that, I was pretty well 100% the studio cat when I met Elton. And then Elton signed me up and took me on the road as part of his rhythm section for that tour of 85, 86. So I became a road dog. But before that, I was a session cat. I was definitely a freelance session player.
How does it work with, like, for instance, you're doing, like you mentioned, Roger's stuff, you're doing Nigel's stuff. And I always call Nigel the king of less is more. And maybe that's what was needed. And I like Nigel because I emulated a lot of what he did. I studied those fills. But what's it like filling in for, you can't really change. Can you change the fill? You can't really change it.
No, there are certain things that are part of, there's that big fill at the end of Don't Let the Sun Go Down, and it has to be played.
Yeah.
There are certain things that have to be played in that song because it's part of the arrangement. So you get, you have to do it justice. You have to play it like that. Same as, for instance, playing One Horse Town, which is a Roger Pope song. I did the best I could to emulate what Roger had done at the end, because there's that whole kind of really, it's crazy stuff he's doing. So, when I was in the studio with Elton, obviously I was then creating new tracks. And so that was, my input, if you like. But, the other stuff, playing Better Off Dead, for instance, with Elton, or playing Benny and the Jets with Elton, you've really got to, people expect it to sound a certain way. So you've got to play it that way.
Especially Better Off Dead. That would be noticeable right away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I used to love playing that song, and it is a difficult song to learn because the time signature is really weird. There's strange bars, and but we played that on the '86 tour, and I loved it. It's a very short song, but it's amazing. It's an amazing tune and wonderful production.
Jen, you got?
Yeah. So, what about your reaction to the movie Rocket Man?
I haven't seen it.
Oh.
Now that's the biggest scoop we've got tonight. Wow. Why is that?
I haven't seen it because several friends of mine who are also involved in the company said it's a complete tissue of lie. Don't go and see it unless you just want to go and see something that's complete fantasy. And I just haven't got round to seeing it.
Caleb said he went. I just talked to Caleb before all the world started going crazy. Caleb said, well, he laughed a little bit. He just said that he had to see it because he knew people would be asking him. So he went to see it, and he's in there. I think he went to see it with his wife. I'm not sure. But he kept saying, whoever was with him kept saying, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. And he said, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. But I enjoyed it. See, I liked it. Believe it or not, the craziest part of the movie, when you've probably seen the commercials, when he's flying at the Troubadour, he's flying in the crowd. I actually almost cried at that part because I'm such a big Elton John fan. And I mean, I know people don't fly, and he certainly didn't. But there was just something about the moment to me. And
you might have been high.
No, I think that happened around Honky
out loud.
I think that was Honky Chateau. I think Honky Chateau was the time that things started going awry. Yeah.
Okay, so when working with Wham, were they all business or did they like to have fun?
Oh, good question.
Well, Andrew originally was all about having fun. George was very focused and very introverted off stage, very introverted, very quiet. Some people would, some people would think he was being rude, but actually what he was doing was he was focusing on the mix. He was focusing what he wanted people to do. I love George. He was an incredibly, again, we lost him way too soon. Incredibly talented human being, much misunderstood by his record label, just like Nik Kershaw. Record labels, we need them, or we did need them. But when you think about how they tried to steer and change the creativity of, George Michael, even Elton to some extent, although Elton had a lot of sway, and some of the other artists that have for instance, Kate Bush was able to do what she did because she bought herself out of the contract with EMI, and then when her contract was over with EMI, she turned around to them and said, "Okay, here's the deal. I'm going to record my album. I'm going to cover the costs. You are going to license the album from me on a album by album basis." And that's the deal she did with EMI. And you can choose to release it or not. But I'm going to give you an album and you can license it. And I'm going to make more money out of it, but I'm going to cover all the costs. So, that's why Kate was able to be so creative. That's why she was able to push the boundaries, because she didn't really have a record label telling her, "Oh no, you can't do that and you need to do more of this." Nik Kershaw, they were trying to make a teeny bop idol out. One of them, practically the greatest songwriting geniuses Britain ever knew.
Now, Charlie, did you get to perform live with Kate Bush, or was the magic mainly done in the studio? And if so, on which of her albums?
I never performed with her live. Well, no, actually, that's not true. I did some TV shows with her in the early days after The Kick Inside came out. I started by doing TV shows. I played on, which albums did I play on, you're saying? Asking?
Just asking which albums you played on.
Yeah, I played on Lionheart. And then the next album was Hounds of Love, which I kind of shared with Stuart. We did Hounds of Love, Sensual World, and The Red Shoes.
Mm-hmm. But it makes sense what you said about Kate, the fact that she could cover that much ground. Because I kept going, wow, I would have, if I was her, I would have never released that. But man, I'm glad she did,
Yeah, that's, that was the only way she could do it. It's like Joni Mitchell, for instance. I mean, she really, I think she dictated what she was going to do next. And the record label just had to hang on for dear life. It was, but you've got to have a very high profile and be very, very strong-willed to be able to do that, because otherwise the A&R department are just going to try and change what you do.
The Made in England album is a favorite. Do you have any fond memories of those sessions at Air Lyndhurst?
Lots. They were amazing. That was a very creative time. Greg Penny was very good at letting us do, basically get into the creative process and then kind of rein it in and arrange it. Yes, one of my happiest memories of that time was, I don't know if you know, but Paul Buckmaster was brought back in as the arranger for that. And he was upstairs in what we called, it was a programming room that we created for him. In fact, I think he used one of my computers and one of my Proteus racks. But we were making mix downs for him and sending them up on ADAT tapes. And he was using an ADAT machine upstairs to synchronize what we were doing downstairs to his arrangements. And he was using a keyboard to write the arrangements on string synths. And he would phone down from the digital dungeon. We called it the digital dungeon. He'd phone down and say, I've got another one. And we'd all stop what we were doing. We'd all run up the stairs and we'd all stand there and listen to what he had created as a string arrangement. But see, the great thing about that was that Paul and I had a lot of time to spend together because there were whole periods of time where he wasn't writing anything. And there are whole periods of time where Davey was doing an overdub, or, Elton was doing an overdub or a vocal, or, so after I'd done the rhythm track for a song, I would go to the cafeteria. I'd go to the cafe at Air Studios, and very often Paul was there waiting for a track to do. We were both sitting there. And so Paul and I spent a lot of that time in the commissary, if you like, just chatting about stuff, and we became pretty close. He was, and that continued when I moved to the States in the late 90s. He and I were in email contact, and we were always phoning each other all the time. He was very, very enthusiastic. Actually, maybe he would be my best desert island companion.
See? Look, it's still turning.
Well, that was, I do, because of the type of channel we have, it seems like, especially lately, I'm doing a farewell obituary video. Paul Buckmaster was one of the hardest ones I've ever had to do.
Yeah, I wrote a long eulogy on my website. I don't know if you ever saw that. I can send you the link. About the time that we were at Air Studios, and how we'd had so much time to spend together. And my wife at the time was half Italian, and Paul Buckmaster's half Italian. So she would come in occasionally into the studio, and so they were on pretty good terms. They speak a bit of Italian as well. I falteringly speak Italian. But,
What brand of drum kit do you prefer? I have to ask.
Well, I was a Premier endorsee for the longest period the Premier ever had an endorsee. I think I was with them for 31 years.
Wow.
But when they lost their distribution deal in the States, and I was living in the States, I had to start looking around. That was about 8 years ago. I had to start looking around for another company, and I actually went with another British company, Natal, who are part of Marshall. They were a percussion company that Jim Marshall bought and then got them to make drums. And so I now play Natal drums. That being said, I always had a great fondness for Premier, and I helped them design the Signia and Janista ranges in the early 90s. And I have the very first Signia kit off the production line, which is the Versace kit, the one that was black, white, and gold for the Versace stage set in 1992.
Oh, speaking of that, I mean, I talked to I did a series a few years ago on fans. I wanted to see their rooms. They're all like this, autographed albums and all this stuff, and. But people forget sometimes it's the musicians who have the best memorabilia. It's you guys.
Yeah, we do quite a lot, unless we fall on hard times and have to sell it or whatever.
Yeah, like
But,
Steve Porcaro told me. He says, you know why we tour? Steve Porcaro told us, says, you know why we really tour? We have to tour. He says because we want to keep our stuff.
Yeah.
There you go, Shannon.
Yeah. I think he's right.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories of watching Elton write any particular songs?
Yeah. The thing about Elton and writing is that, you know, they would basically block book the studio for a number of weeks. But Elton only ever worked Monday to Friday from about, well, he would come in at 8 a.m. and then leave at 5 or 6. That we'd normally be told to start at 9 or 10. But we'd be there kind of from 8 a.m. to 5, maybe 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. And then even though the weekends were block booked, he wouldn't come in the weekends. But the way it would work is that Elton would be given a lyric book by Bernie Taupin. And as time went on, they got more and more elaborate. I mean, they were beautifully printed, and they had these illustrations on them, and it would be bound. And Elton would be in the back of the car being driven into the session in the morning, and he'd be looking through the book, and he would find a lyric that said something to him that day, and he'd come in clutching. He'd go, okay, I'm going to write to this one today. And he'd plonk it in the piano and he'd start thumping away. And sometimes he'd get me to start a drum track, or I would, you know, I'd play a loop of some kind for him to play to. You know the song Believe off Made in England?
Oh, yeah.
It actually, Elton wrote that to a tabla part that comes in the second verse. And we did the whole song to that tabla part. There's a kind of loop that goes, and that's, he wrote this slow song over the top of it. But the secret with Elton was that if he hadn't got the basis of the song within 15 or 20 minutes, then he'd just start hammering away, and we knew the song wouldn't make the album. We knew we'd kind of, right, yeah. If it was after an hour, it was like, yeah, I think, yeah. We'd be in the control room looking at each other going, I don't think this is going to make it. It might be a B-side, but it won't make the album.
Well, there must have been times when Elton or other artists would have come up and said, yeah, keep doing that. Yeah, that's it. Like when he wanted you recorded.
When I first met Elton,
yeah.
The song that became Wrapper Up was this funk rock feel that the bass player and I were playing, and Elton went running through the control room saying, hit the record button, quick, I want some of that.
I love that.
But yeah, and that, you know, that's, yes, that was writing the other way around. But most of the time he would come in the studio and spend about an hour before we started tracking. And he would write, and they would record onto ADAT, originally cassette, and then it was ADAT or DAT, so that they would actually have a recording of, you know, what he had done. And the assistant engineer, it was up to him to capture everything, like hit the record button.
I didn't know they did that on DAT, because I can't get rid of my DAT player. I still have it. I cannot get rid of it. I never play it, but I can't get rid of it. Shan, you got some questions?
Charlie, you've done so much in the music world. Is there a book in the works?
Yeah, actually there is. Well, kind of. My web girl is, she was persuading me to try, and she said, come on, everyone's got a book in them, and you've got probably more than one book in you. And I said, yeah, but, you know, I don't want to write, oh, then I played with, and then I did this. You know, I was trying to look for an angle on the whole thing. And my web girl, who lives in Seattle, she and I were talking a few years back about something about the website. And I said, you know, I'm extremely grateful to a certain number of people who stuck their necks out when I was starting out. And even, you know, later on, people who committed themselves, who actually took a risk on me and said, look, you know, use this guy, he's great. And they saw something in me. And there are a number of people that are key to me having moved on another stage. They're sound engineers, producers, some of them musicians. And so I turned to my web girl and I said, well, what about gratitude? What about the angle being gratitude? And she said, great. She said, you don't have to do it chronologically, but why don't you start writing chapters of your book about the people for whom you're grateful for sticking their necks out. So yeah, that's the way I'm going to do it, and that's why I'm doing it. In fact, I'm in the process of doing it.
Well, also, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you this. Let's touch on this again. You're a great storyteller. There's all these idiosyncratic things about these musicians that are don't have to be negative, right? Because a lot of artists I talk to say, well, I don't want to write one of those books. And I always go, well, it doesn't have to be one of those books. And if you got an angle, like you said, and I think the world needs something like that as far as gratitude, because it seems like we're all burning in hell. But it's just, hopefully it'll get better soon. No, but
you think?
I think it'll get better.
I know.
You know, no kidding. And I didn't mean that in a religious sense. But I think that's an important thing. But what about Nik Kershaw again? Like, for instance, he was being marketed, you're right, as a teen idol. And I just listened to those first two albums today again. And by the way, excellent, freaking crazy drum. I loved it. But I listened to that going, so many songs on those albums could have been hits, and they weren't in North America. Because there's such strong, it's like Elton, strong album tracks. There was never enough time to release more than 2 singles sometimes, because Elton, especially in the 70s, was on to the next album in 6 months.
Yeah,
but
he was doing an album every 9 or 10 months, Elton. In the early 70s, he was just like coming off the road, doing an album, going back on the road, coming off the road, doing an album, going back. You know, it was apparently I heard between 1972 and 1976, 1 in every 4 albums sold worldwide was an Elton John album.
Oh wow, yeah, that's great.
And that was the body of his work. Anyway, so you're saying about Nik Kershaw?
Yeah,
yes.
Nik, I mean, it's like Elton. I mean, I'm listening to some of his album tracks that I haven't heard in a few years. And I'm going, that could have been a hit. That should have been a hit. Like, I mean, he's a strong musician.
Yeah. Oh, very strong. Yeah, great, and a really amazing writer, great lyric writer. I mean, he wrote lyrics and the music. Yeah, and even his later albums, I've got a number of his albums, and I love them. I think they're wonderful. It's just, But I would love to have him call me and say, hey, I got a track for you to do. Could you do it? And I would just jump over. I'd fall over myself to do it.
The thing about Nik Kershaw, though, unfortunately, I mean, good for him, but he looked like $1 million. He looked like a teen idol. That's the thing. He really did. He was a beautiful man. I mean, he just was, So what else would a record label do? Do you have one?
No, I just have people on here saying, please write a book.
See?
Go ahead. Yes.
All right. Well, I'm going to start serializing it on my website, I think.
What about Red Strikes Back? That was one of my favorite albums. I didn't like it in the beginning, and I like when that happens. I listened to it and going, and then all of a sudden it ends up being one of my favorite albums of that era. Do you have any stories about that one?
Yeah, well, that was right at the end of the bad old drug days. That was we came into the studio. This is when Air was on the 4th floor, overlooking Oxford Circus on Oxford Street and Regent Street in the centre of London. Air Studio moved out to Air Lyndhurst, and actually we did Made in England. We were the first band as such in Air Lyndhurst in the mid-90s. But in the 80s, Air Studios was up on the top floor above a store called Topshop in the middle of London. And, we would get in there, again, early in the morning, and Elton would turn up. But we never knew what would happen. We never knew if Elton would walk out halfway through recording a tune in tears and get in his car and drive home. Or, at the time, he was really on the edge. He was very, very close to the edge. So it wasn't the easiest album to record, but there were some really productive moments, and there's some really great stuff that I enjoyed. For instance, the session with Pete Townsend playing acoustic guitar on Town of Plenty. That was a great track. It's a really stonking track. And And Pete was just playing acoustic guitar. He was strumming away.
It says an awful lot though about a player when he's in that kind of shape and still puts out. I mean, almost on an instinctual, guttural, primal level, be able to still be Elton John.
Yeah, it does rather, doesn't it? It's yeah, and that was but it wasn't the easiest album to do, but it was still very productive in many ways.
Well, we're going to wrap it up because we've gone past our hour, and we you know what? We could talk for hours. I so appreciate your work, and it's been a dream of mine to talk to you, and I've wanted to talk to you for a long time.
Very welcome.
So COVID-19 indirectly made me and Shannon and a lot of fans talk to Charlie Morgan. So I've got something to ask you. I'll email it to you tomorrow, and just expect something from me. But Charlie,
thank you so much for your time.
You can do that? Oh, you're a drummer. Of course I'm a drummer. I can't do that.
Bugger prosper.
Take care of yourself, man.
Thank you, Charlie.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow, that was a lot of fun. That was he's amazing. What a nice man.
So nice.
We're not going to keep you long tonight because we've got our autistic daughter upstairs, and she has seizures, and she hasn't had one in a while. Our son is watching her, but so we don't like to be away from her too long when that happens. Charlie Morgan, what a guy!
He was good. He was so conversational.
Well, like I said, the editor of the Elton John website, we had a long conversation for a few hours. I think it was yesterday, and I can't keep my days in a row. And he just said, "You're gonna love him. You're going to love this man." So I'm not going to mention his name, but to the editor of Elton John's website, we would like to get you on here because you tell a good tale.
There's an idea.
That guy is really interesting. Like this man, he likes to keep private, and I understand that. But I got off Skyping him, and I came to Shannon and says, I could be friends with this guy. He's such a cool guy. But Charlie Morgan, too, and a lot of people we've talked to on Friday Night Live. We're getting big respect, Charlie. Yeah, of course. Charlie's one of those guys, you could put him in any situation, almost any situation, and he'd get it done. And a tight drummer, just love his stuff. I remember first noticing him on Nik Kershaw, though. I remember listening to that and going, God, who's this drummer? Oh, wouldn't it be good? I was like, wouldn't it be good or wouldn't it be nice? What's that? What's the title, Shan?
Wouldn't it be...
I don't know why. I have mental block sometimes.
Wouldn't it be good?
Wouldn't it be good? Yeah, that's it.
He's not a singer, but I'm even a more worse singer.
Shannon can't sing at all.
I always say there's a couple songs that are in my wheelhouse and I can do okay.
No, that's not true at all.
I was in the choir growing up.
You're very pretty, but and you're really funny. The reason the first night I met Shannon, she made me laugh so many times. I'm going, I don't remember the last time I'd been with a woman who makes me laugh so much. So yeah, she got a foot massage that night. That's all I can tell you. That's as lucky as I got. No, I don't do that, guys. Okay, we're gonna say hi. Great interview. Charlie was great. Wouldn't it be good? Thank you.
Good. That's what I said. It'd be good.
I do that sometimes with certain words. You ever find yourself doing that? I'll do that, and I'll be doing a video over there on the green screen, and then I'll say that, and I'm going, is that right? Is that right? Because when I was young, I always get the Elton John, like Tumbleweed Connections or Tumbleweed Connection. At the end, I don't know if it was my French self part of me.
That's true, Andrew. We all do sing awesome in the shower.
Hey, Andrew Deppish. We know Andrew. Andrew and our son went to a
drum clinic?
Dave Weckl drum clinic together
in Edmonton.
And Chase really he thought Andrew was a cool dude. Andrew kind of looked out for him during that, and Andrew's a great drummer too. So, hey, Andrew, I'm glad you're on here. We're interviewing a lot of drummers because my son and I are drummers, but he's really the drummer in the family because I hardly drum anymore. So that's kind of it. Are you going to have a little drink tonight just to relax?
Probably not.
Oh, I'd be remiss if I didn't say 50,000. Thank you. Oh my God, how could we forget that?
Yay!
Yeah,
over 50,000 subscribers.
Yeah, we should be at 51.
Done,
thank you. We should be thank you for your help. We should be at 51 by tomorrow, which is really, really cool. We have never spent money on our channel to get hits. We haven't done that. But and we won't do it. We refuse to like buy hits for our videos. This was all done the old-fashioned way. But what we should have done with Rock History Music is advertise it on Facebook, which we're going to do now. We're going to start advertising it. You might see an advertisement for our Facebook group, or I don't think we can advertise the YouTube. I don't know how that works. If anybody knows, like, get a hold of it. Chime in, yeah. And if anybody wants to get a hold, if you buy a T-shirt, by the way, if you do buy a T-shirt, can you send us a picture? But if you do send us a picture, we will be using it at the roll call. I don't know what you call the end thing, the segment, the ending of our videos.
There'll be a picture of you, is what.
There'll be a pic. Thank you, Shannon. She always rescues me. So, what's that? What's that look you did? When I do that, I look crazy. When you do it, it looks cute. I look like I'm in this from the Insane Asylum. I had to move our logo there because it was right on top of Charlie. What I was going to do is I'm going to ask Charlie if I can do a series on him. That's why I'm going to email him tomorrow. I'm going to say, let's do a 10-part series on your career. There's Kevin Henry. Hi, Kevin. Kevin wrote my top 40 Elton John. It's the first time someone's written for me. Kevin wrote the entire script for the top 40 Elton John songs. Look that up. Kevin did an amazing job, did a lot of great research. He knew a lot of this already. He's a big Elton John fan. And Kevin, we're going to get you on that Elton John album by album thing, because we're talking to fans with this. We're talking to people like Charlie Morgan. We're talking to Caleb Quay and some other people I can't mention yet because it's not been confirmed. Not Elton. I'm never going to get Elton. I don't think so. If Elton's watching, can I interview you, please? And I know someone who knows Bernie really well. And he's not a gatekeeper, because that's what we call them. Who do I have to talk to get that interview? But Bernie is a possibility, I would think. I think we could have a great interview with Bernie Taupin, even for the fans. But the thing is, how do you talk to Bernie Taupin and have just 1 hour? I mean, hell, how do you do it with Charlie Morgan? I mean, considering we barely touched on Kate Bush because there was just certain things that, thanks, bro, cool, Kevin Henry. He's such a nice guy. Kevin's got this beautiful, deep, it sounds like a whiskey, so it's got a little vibrato in it when he talks. And I'm talking about you, Kevin. And he does a lot of presentations and does a lot of good work in every community he's with. Loves his grandchildren, always posts pictures of them. They're beautiful, but so is he. He's a beautiful man. I'm glad I know you, Kevin. You're a great man. And so we're going to get him on the track by track thing. If anybody wants to be involved in this, we're going through every single Elton John album. We're going to get fans on there as well as music people and some radio guys, because I interview radio guys now and then. And if I don't have like someone talking about Pinky from Caribou, for instance, I'll get a hold of my friend. Hey, do you like that song? I don't know it. Can you listen to it and give me a soundbite? Okay, I'll do that. There's Kevin. I am blushing. You're a good man, Kevin. Glad I know you. I already said that. I'll say it again. But anyway, if anybody wants to get involved, I'm sorry, I'm being long-winded. If you want to come, you have to come on Skype with me, and you'd have to say, I want to talk about these 4 songs. It doesn't have to be the same album, but we're going to try to cover every song without playing the song, because if we play the song, then we're get a copyright strike, or else we won't make any money on the video, and it's way too much work not to make any money. We have to make money. So we're starting with Empty Sky. You don't have to start with Empty Sky, but that's the one we're going to present first. So get a hold of us on Rock History Music on Facebook. Just text me there and say, hey, these are my favorite songs. I'd like to talk about those or something. And aren't your feet freezing?
It's a little chilly down here.
Oh my God, she's bare feet down
AC
here.
was on for a while.
Yeah. Anyway, Shannon says, you're the first person that ever told me I had nice feet. Well, you have nice feet. Anyway, enough about foot stuff. Look, she's hitting me. She's hitting me down there. She's like, stop it. Stop it. Okay. So one more thing before we go. Andrew, yes, agree. Put an Elton interview out in the universe. Yeah, you never know. You never know. You never know. So we're going to go now because it's already here. It's 7:14. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in. If we didn't get to your question, how do I end this thing again? Oh, yeah, it's over here, isn't it?
The finish.
The finish button? Yeah. The brains in the family. Anyway, thanks for everyone who came on here. If we didn't get to your question, we're really, really sorry. I am going to try to interview, and I'll get a hold of them tonight or tomorrow, Charlie Morgan for a series. If you have questions for Charlie, don't put it in this thing. Email me at through the Rock History Music Facebook page. You can always email me if you have any questions about anybody. If anybody out there has somebody they want us to interview, remember this is a classic rock site, so it kind of has to be of that ilk. And if they are, and by all means, we'd like to talk to them. So that's what we do. We do a lot of interviews. Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Happy Friday. Have a really nice weekend.
Till next time.
Thank you for all the folks who buy our t-shirts. We appreciate that. Links in the description of this video. There you go.
Bye.
Take care. End broadcast.